double spey cast incorporates three of the basic principles that we'll use in all of our spey casts. The setup, the 180-degree D loop, and the forward casting stroke. Let's break these principles down one at a time. The setup is the most important. In the setup, we have to break line tension. The line's hanging all the way downstream, parallel to the bank, and the line is taut. We can't have any slack line at this point. The current helps that by getting the line taut, but if we had slack line right now, we're going to have to roll that slack line down in order to make a good setup. The line's tight right below me, and I'm lifting the rod tip up, breaking surface tension. I come across my body and I stop it. This gives us a nice loop of slack line. The line leader junction's got to stop right here, just about a rod length away from me and out in front of me. I don't want it out too far. We don't want it out too far in front of us. It's got to be about a rod length away. We'll lift up on the rod, lift up, break surface tension, cross my body, and delicately stop. Notice this rod position here. My rod tip comes down and it stops right on my left shoulder. Our arm positions are in fairly tight. I've got a nice loose grip on the rod, a nice loose grip on the butt section. We lift up, we swing, and we're at line leader junctions about a rod tip away on our downstream side. We're casting off our right shoulder, and that's going to mean that our setup has to be downstream from the direction of our cast. Lift up the rod tip, break surface tension, stop right there as the rod meets the shoulder, and you have a perfect setup each time.
Remember that the setup for the double spey keeps your arms close to your body. It's a gentle lift, cross your arms across your body, and end up with your rod touching your shoulder. I see people get in trouble quite frequently with their spey rod when they get their arms out in front of them and rip that line violently off the water, thus ruining their setup. Let's see a demonstration of that.
If our arms come out a little bit too far in front of us and we come across our body like this gives us a violent setup and we lose control on where the line's going to drop on the water. If I come around now on my cast, the line and leader's still up in front of me, and I'm going to cross over the rod like this, and we've got what we call a lot of downtime. We need control on that setup every time, and the way to get continuity in that is by bringing the rod tip up slowly, break surface tension, 45 degrees, and sweep it gently until our casting arm meets our opposite shoulder. This gives us the slack line we need to form our 180-degree D loop.
The D loop in the spey cast is the line that is trajected behind the rod and behind the caster in a loop. It forms a D. The rod is the straight line of the D, and the line makes the circle of the D.
The D loop's formed by the rod tip. Let's demonstrate. Set up. Right here, D loop right there. You can see how that line tip comes and extends behind the rod tip. Let's do it again. Right there, we've got a nice D loop. The key, of course, is to allow that D loop to come in behind the rod tip, but not settle on the water behind us. That D loop can take the form of a wide D loop, or we can narrow it to be more of an ovular shape, more of a bullet shape, and that's going to give us the maximum amount of power behind the rod. Set up, wide D loop, I come around very slowly and traject it outward. That's a great cast when you're learning. If you want more power in the cast, we're going to have to narrow that loop up a little bit. Set up, and right here I accelerate just a little bit more, and you can see that bullet shape. Let's look at that bullet shape again. Right there. You can see that our line's coming in behind us and narrowing way up, and that's going to give us the maximum load on the rod. We make a nice setup, come around, accelerate, stop the rod tip there, and just as that line's starting to settle out at its maximum distance behind me, I begin my forward casting stroke. It's important not to lose the anchor of the cast. And what I mean by that is we make our setup, our line is anchored out in front of us. When I come around to form that D loop, I do it in such a way where the line doesn't lift off the water in front of me. We like to leave a couple of feet of line and leader right on the water to make that D loop and the rod have the maximum amount of resistance against the water. That makes this cast an efficient cast, and the rod does the work.
Now that we've talked about the setup, the anchor, and what a D loop looks like, let's talk about how we form the D loop with the 180-degree swing.
It's absolutely essential that when we form our D loop, that we're getting our D loop to form exactly 180 degrees in the opposite direction of our cast. If I want to cast 90 degrees across current, when I bring this D loop behind me, this D loop has to be 180 degrees opposite of that direction in order to get the perfect load on the rod. One of the ways to accomplish that, we make our setup, 45-degree angle, 180 degrees, stop the rod right there. If the rod stops right here, I'm going to come forward right here. That's on a parallel plane, and we get that 180-degree load behind the tip of the rod. If I don't get that, if I make my setup and I bring the rod around here like this and continue to come around here, I cannot make that 180-degree swing, because that would mean I have to cast down this direction right here. So it's absolutely critical. We make our setup, 45 degrees, I'm coming around, sweep the rod right there, 180 degrees opposite the direction of my cast, and make the forward cast.
Upon completing the setup of the double spey, you'll have your rod against your left shoulder and at a 45-degree angle. It's important that you keep your rod tip on a continuous plane from this point forward. Think about single-handed casting. When we make our single-handed cast, 10 o'clock to 2 o'clock, we keep our rod tip on one plane. We don't dip our rod tip all over the place. We keep it on one plane. The same principle applies when spey casting. When we're going into our forward cast, you keep your tip on the same plane. There's no dipping or sweeping down of the rod. Let's have John demonstrate that for us.
It's important to keep that rod at a 45-degree angle and the tip on a parallel plane as we form that D loop behind us. This is going to give us the maximum power in the cast. It's absolutely critical we don't drop that tip behind us. I make my setup, and right here it's critical we don't drop that tip down. I've just unloaded all my line, all the power in the rod with the line stick on the water behind me, and there's no possible way that I can make that forward cast. Remember, make your setup in tight, parallel plane, form that D loop, and you've got a loaded rod at that point. Let's talk a little bit about the timing on the D loop. I make my setup, and we're going to refer to this sweep as the rooster tail. You can see that little rooster tail form on the fly line as I sweep it behind me.
When we sweep all of the slack line out from in front of us and form our D loop, what we will see is coming off that slack line will be a big rooster tail of water. Just as this rooster tail reaches its end point and starts to collapse, that's our signal to go forward with the forward stroke of the spey cast. Let's have John demonstrate that.
Remember, we've made our setup, we formed the rooster tail, the rod's at a 45-degree angle, a single plane, and you can see that rooster tail come right off the water and actually pass directly in front of me. It's at that point where I'm forming my 180-degree D loop behind the rod tip. That rooster tail, or the speed in which we bring that rooster tail around us, is going to jump the line behind me. And that's really key. We want to jump the line behind the rod tip. We don't want the line to come and settle behind the rod tip and lay on the water, but jump it behind the rod tip, aerialize it behind us right before we make our forward casting stroke. Setup, rooster tail, quick acceleration, jump, beautiful forward cast. That's absolutely key, is to keep the line speed at a constant level. Set up, watch the rooster tail pass around in front of us, big D loop behind us, and a perfect forward cast with very little effort. Let's talk a little bit about the forward casting stroke.
One of the best ways to really nail down your timing on your forward cast is to watch that rooster tail come around in front of you and let your eyes transfer back to see your D-loop form. You watch your D-loop and you want to see it hovering. If you wait too long, you'll see it fall into the water and you'll lose all the power of your cast. If you go too soon, you'll never see your D-loop hover. It'll be on its way back and you'll be firing forward too soon. You lose all the power of the cast. One of the best ways to really time your cast is to let your eyes watch that D-loop, much like you would watch your back cast with a single-handed rod.
Remember, your grip on the rod is light. I'm just holding the rod very lightly in the foregrip. My thumb and these two fingers are gripping the butt section of the rod, and the casting stroke is in fairly tight. My elbows are down. My elbows and my rod and my reel are all pointed in the direction of the cast, and this is going to give me the maximum power in my power stroke. As we make our sweep, we come around, make our sweep 180 degrees down. Remember, my elbows are still down, my rod tip is near vertical, and this is where the power of the stroke comes from. It's my underhand. My underhand comes forward and snaps the butt section in toward my chest. That's where the power is.
As John makes his cast, keep a close eye on the position of his hands and how much he uses his bottom hand as his power hand.
Remember to stay loose in the shoulders, elbows in close to the body. Your underhand's going to do most of the work. Right here, I just force that underhand right in against my chest. My right hand, or my rod hand, does very little of the work. It's virtually just guiding my rod tip. We make our setup, our sweep, and underhand casting stroke right there. This makes this long rod, this heavy rod, very light in our hand. It creates a good lever. This action right here, right there, that's where the power of the Spey cast comes from. One of the major faults in double Spey casting, the angler makes a perfect setup, a great sweep, but right there he raises his rod tip up high. The only way he's got to move now for his forward casting stroke is to hammer it down. Let's see what that looks like. Up high, and I get this wide loop, this wide upward loop, and I lose all the power in my forward cast. Keep your elbows down low. Remember, the power in throwing a ball, the power is keeping that elbow down low and throwing it. The same thing goes for the Spey cast. Elbows relaxed, down low, and power that underhand. The underhand does all the work. It's actually kicking the rod out, kick right there. Kick. And that really throws the cast out nicely. Let's put it all together now. The rod tip's pointed parallel to the bank, the line's tight below us. We've just swung our fly through this beautiful flat. We lift the rod tip up slowly to break surface tension of the line. We make our setup, a nice good load, forward cast, and we have a perfect cast. That's a fun and easy cast, and we recommend the double Spey cast as the first Spey cast to learn.
Don't be intimidated by the two-handed rod. This is just another great way to deliver a fly to the fish's mouth. Have fun with it, and we'll see you on the river.